Alright, today we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing radical expressions. Previously we were talking about adding and subtracting radical expressions, and when you're adding and subtracting you have to have like terms in order to add or subtract things together, but with multiplication and division everything's fair game. So you can multiply any two things together that you want to, or divide any two things that you want to, and work with them that way. So if I look at these examples here, like A, I have a couple different options here. I have the square root of 3 times the square root of 6. I could, if I wanted to, just take 3 times 6 and get the square root of 18 and then start breaking this down. So square root of 9, square root of 2, and if you want to, okay, I know the square root of 9 is 3, and so I have 3 times the square root of 2. Alright, so that is one possible way to do that. Some of you might say, well, why would I do that when it's already kind of broken down to 3 and 6? It's almost like starting with 18 and breaking it down into 3 and 6 already. Yes, and you can think about it that way. So at first glance, it doesn't look like anything can be simplified, but if you take 6 down to 3 and 2, well, now I have a pair and everything's being multiplied here, so 3 times 3 would give me 9, which comes back to 3 anyway. So remember, pairs of square roots just give you that inside number, and you still get 3 square root 2. Okay, so you can do it that way as well. Just depends on what you're more comfortable with. Okay. Looking at B, we use our knowledge of what it means to square something. So remember, this means 5 square root of 3 times 5 square root of 3. And if I reorder everything, since everything's being multiplied, commutative property says I can reorder my multiplication. And really I have 25, and then square root of 3 times square root of 3 is like square root of 9, or we have a pair, so we come out with 3. So 25 times 3, I get 75. And I'm sure at first glance it doesn't look like that's going to turn into anything remotely nice, but it actually does. Okay? So sometimes when you multiply two radicals together, or you multiply two irrational numbers together, you can sometimes end up getting a rational number, which is interesting. That can't happen when you're adding an irrational with another number, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in class. And then number 2, you've got some options. You could take these two and multiply them together right away to get 2 and 32x to the second, and you could go this route and then split everything up. Okay, so I have square root of 32 and the square root of x to the second, and you could break down 32. I'm going to go 16 and 2 and take a shortcut because I know the square root of 16 is 4. And then the square x to the second under the square root. Remember, these just cancel each other out. This just turns into x. So what do we have? We have 2 times 4 times x, or 8x, with the square root of 2 left over. That's one way to get there, and then there are other ways to get there as well. You could just break down the 4 right away. I know the square root of 4 is 2. Okay. So this comes out to 2. I know the square root of this, or I could break this down into 4 and 2. Okay, so this is also 2. So I have 2 times 2 times 2, that gives me the 8s. And then I'm left with the square root of 2 on the inside, but then I also have to look at my x's. So that would be 2 x's together would give me x squared, but under a square root comes out to x, and we still get the same thing. So you can do it that way too. Alright, last example here. You can also use the distributive property. You can distribute an irrational number. So I could take the square root of 2 times 5 and get 5 square root of 2. And then take square root of 2 times the square root of 12. And you can do that many different ways. As you know, you could go, okay, square root of 2 times square root of 12, or you could break down the square root of 24. Doesn't matter. I would go this route, and I could break this down into 4 and 3. And I know the square root of 4 is 2, so I really have 5 square root of 2 plus 2, and then these two things are left on the inside of my square root. So 2 square root 6, and that would be the simplified version of that. All right, it could happen that we could add those two things together if they came out to like terms, but they do not. So that is a brief intro on multiplication with radical expressions. I will have one more short video on the division part